Thank you very much, Madam President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I feel especially honored and humbled to be before you in a very critical moment for the international relations. Our world is now more multipolar than ever. Still, multipolarity goes along with a deep crisis of multilateralism and also a crisis of the United Nations system of rules. This crisis is multifaceted. Erosion of trust, revamping of economic protectionism, states ignoring or withdrawing from international agreements, unilateral economic sanctions without the backing of the Security Council, official threats against international justice. The conflicts, the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, and the deadlock of the Security Council have exacerbated the situation and, in the words of the Secretary General, may have perhaps fatally undermined the latter's authority. And all this happened in a historical moment when humanity's fate is more tightly interconnected than ever. Global public goods such as peace, sustainable development, elimination of poverty, nuclear disarmament, protection of the Earth's biodiversity, pandemic prevention and control. All these are far more central to our shared fate than at any other previous time in human history. Unfortunately, the undermining of the regulatory capacity of the nation-states that globalization entails is not balanced by the development of efficient, democratic, international governance institutions. Instead of the emergence of a cosmopolitan community, we see rather the global dominance of the economy over politics, of market values over democratic ones. Therefore, I see as the main issue for a democratic international order and for safeguarding also the democratic character of national democracies is to put limits on asymmetric international and transnational economic power. Martin Luther King used to say that true peace is not merely the absence of tensions. It is the presence of justice. And for justice, we need full respect of international law, but also promotion of democracy as rule of the people and human rights, both at the domestic and international levels. Both of them are interconnected. The essence of democracy is not so much a distinctive method or technique of producing governments, but the actual realization of the rule of the people. In other words, self-government in political equality. Moreover, to the extent that most more important decisions are no longer taken at the national, but at the transnational and international levels, then democratic principles should apply there as well. At the international level, the concept of democracy entails due respect for the independence and sovereign equality of states and their equal participation in global decision-making, involving also the participation of their citizens. Taking into account this multivalent importance of democracy, I think that it is really regrettable that the actual text of the Pact of the Future does not mention democracy even once. Regarding now human rights, the interconnection of domestic and international levels is obvious. It is true that the right discourse has been used ideologically in the past for the legitimization of colonization and its civilizing mission. However, the same language, as it has been shaped by the Enlightenment and constitutionalism, was also an important emancipatory weapon for the anti-colonial struggles. Even in the so-called First World, human rights have been used to promote the agenda of equality and equity. For instance, both William Du Bois and Malcolm X have extensively used the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as an argument for black emancipation in the United States. The emancipatory function of human rights is twofold. They expand the autonomy and the agency of their bearers, and simultaneously transform the values, principles, and institutions that define the overall legal order. Human rights are about classes of interests and power, so they can never be apolitical or historical. There is a continuum in their historicity. Still, the interests of the multitude, of the majority of those living in developed countries, are parallel, not antithetical to the interests of those in the global south. There is indeed a south in the north and a north in the south. Let me give you just a small, interesting historical example. The first head of state of Haiti, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, called as an attribute of honor the Polish people the white Negroes of Europe. And that was for recognize that Polish have deserted the Napoleonic army and have joined the Haitian slaves in their war of independence in 1802. My report presents empirical corroboration by a number of recent global surveys which show that public support for democracy and human rights is consistently high, both in developing and developed countries alike. However, and this is a warning, this support goes in tandem with growing dissatisfaction about their actual realization and a feeling of alienation from representative democracy. So, which are the major obstacles to the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order? In my understanding, number one problem is the crisis of multilateralism and the widening of the North-South divide. The shifting power dynamics between North and South and the accompanying disagreements over values, human rights, and interventionism, in tandem with the perceived ineffectiveness of institutions of global governance, including the United Nations, put the international order system of rules under serious stress. Along to that, we see a fragmentation of international law. The lack of an hierarchical structure of international law in general, and more specifically of the United Nations systems, reinforces centrifugal forces. Different organs, agencies, or institutions of the United Nations system have overlapping competencies and sometimes, often, a different understanding and methodology. Imagine, for instance, how diametrically opposed are the positions of ILO and IMF. In that way, as one author has written, once one knows which institution will deal with an issue, one already knows how it will be disposed of. However, a minimum of consistency of implementation of human rights, especially regarding the obligation to protect, respect, and remedy, is necessary, both for the efficiency and the legitimacy of the United Nations. The Pact of the Future includes also a goal to enhance coordination among United Nations entities working on human rights. I deeply believe that international law would be inconsistent if it were to demand that all its actors, states and not states, respect human rights as a global standard of expected conduct, and to exclude from this responsibility the institutions of the United Nations. Therefore, mainstreaming human rights, that is, integrating their standards, methodologies, and ownership throughout the United Nations system, all its agencies, is a precondition for their full implementation. Another important problem is the globalization and the ensuing growing power of non-state actors. I'm not going something new to you. Globalization is an irreversible trend which facilitated trade, investment, flows of people, technological advances. However, the current neoliberal model of it widened inequalities, and the colossal inequalities among and within our states are just the top of the iceberg. The influence of the big multinational corporations in synergy with the institutions of international economic governments is shaping global economic law and governance in a regime that serves their interests and reinforces their power. That regime not only allows multinational corporations to jump jurisdictions to escape state regulation and reach tax havens, it also constitutes an hierarchical legal infrastructure that functions to their advantage and perpetuates power asymmetries globally. It is clear that we need a new model of globalization. In view of that, the report presents the following axes as thematic priorities for the mandate. Number one is reinvigorating North-South dialogue in order exactly to bridge this widening divide between North and South. I do not to include proposals that are just a wishing list. I would like to promote tangible, effective proposals which could gather consensual agreement. Which state would seriously oppose the repeal of the Civilized Nations Clause in Article 38 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice, which still perpetuates the distinction between civilized and non-civilized nations? Which are the non-civilized nations today? Of course, there are many thorny issues which entail a clash of interests between North and South. The report suggests to explore the possibility of a second North-South summit. As you may remember, the first and only North-South summit, officially known as the International Meeting on Cooperation and Development, was held in Cancun in 1981. Other proposals, other axes include the need of mainstreaming the application of human rights through the United Nations system, integrating artificial intelligence into the promotion of global democracy, committing multinational corporations to the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order, promoting dialogue among civilizations in relation to democracy and human rights, and finally protecting international and national adjudicating bodies facing authoritarian and illiberal practices. Mr. President, after finishing the presentation of my report, it is also my pleasure to present to you the report from the official country visit to the Maldives conducted by my predecessor, Mr. Livingstone. As an island state, the Maldives faces unique challenges in its pursuit of inclusive and sustainable development, ensuring that all citizens benefit equitably from economic growth and promoting governance that provides equal access to opportunities and resources for everyone. Noteworthy progress has been made, including the establishment of the National Social Protection Agency, which aims to reduce poverty, poverty and enhance social welfare. While the Maldives have made significant progress in its economic development, there remain pressing challenges that require attention from a human rights perspective. A more comprehensive approach that integrates human rights, sustainable development, and international cooperation is essential to ensuring that economic growth is inclusive and equitable for all citizens. In alignment with my predecessor's recommendations, I call on the government of the Maldives to diversify its economy beyond the traditional tourism sector. Strategic investments in renewable energy, ecotourism, and sustainable agriculture are critical to building a more resilient and sustainable economic future. Furthermore, I encourage the strengthening of legal and regulatory frameworks surrounding migrant workers by ratifying the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and members of their families. Many thanks for your attention.